Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's webinar. I hope I'm coming through loud and clear over your computer or mobile device. It's great to have your company this evening. I hope you've had a good Tuesday and managed to get through whatever you needed to so far. Maybe got the kids in bed and had some dinner, even if you're lucky. And what a good time to be talking about parenting, and in particular, sleep and settling this evening. Now, in a moment, I'll tell you a bit more about what's going to happen this evening and introduce our presenter. But my name's Tony Gates. I'm from the Parenting Research Centre, and we're responsible for developing and hosting these sessions. You will have heard about them through the Raising Children Network, but we're kind of the folks behind the scenes. And this is a new thing that we're trying at the moment, so we're quite excited about it, and it might be new for you too. So why don't we talk just for a second about what a webinar is and how you can get the most out of it. So if you're on a computer of some sort, maybe a laptop or a desktop, what you should see at the moment is a screen with a picture in the middle that says Sleep and Settling, Key Ideas for Parents. And on the left of your screen, towards the bottom, you should see a chat box where you can see some words coming up. That's people talking, okay? So this is a live session, it's not a recording. Everyone here is a real person, and you have the opportunity to interact with each other and with us. So we want to make it as interactive as we can. So I encourage you to use that chat box. People are already doing a great job of that, which is good to see. And we'll have an opportunity to ask questions at the end. One other thing I want to point out is a couple of times throughout tonight's session, you might see a poll come up on the screen. What that is a multiple choice question. All you have to do is click your answer and press submit if you'd like to, and we'll get some more information from you, and you can see what other people are saying as well. If you're on a mobile device, it might be that not everything works for you. You may just get the slides and the audio. We're sorry about that. It is some limits to the functionality of the technology at the moment. Now, I know you don't want to hear too much more from me, so I'll wrap up as quickly as I can. But before I do, I just want to do a couple of acknowledgements. One is to the Victorian State Government, who have been very supportive of this project and provided funding so that we can provide these sessions to you at no cost, which is wonderful. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we're meeting tonight. Now, for myself and Di, your presenter tonight here in Melbourne, that's the Wurundjeri people. But of course, we've got people joining us from all over. So you would have different traditional owners where you are possibly. If you know anything about them, feel free to share that in chat. That would be really interesting. Now, just a word or two about Di. Di's a registered nurse. And she started out working in acute nursing with children and their families, and more recently has moved into a role of training and coaching and teaching around pediatrics, and particularly on sleep. She's currently engaged with the community child health at Murdoch Children's Research Institute. But one thing about Di is she's got heaps of experience talking with real parents, which is really valuable, I think. So she's worked with all sorts from all kinds of different areas, and I think that really comes through when you hear from her. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Di. There'll just be a little break of a few seconds here while we hand over the mic, and then you'll hear Di, and you'll see her briefly on video as well.
Thanks for that, Tony. Okay, all set up? Yep. Good evening, everyone. Lovely to meet you all, and I hope that throughout this session that I can help increase your knowledge around children's sleep and your role in developing good sleep habits for your child. I'll start by really just saying that we're going to approach this a bit differently this evening, the subject of sleep. We're going to look at it through a different lens. You're going to look at the big picture, and hopefully by the end of the seminar you might feel you have a great understanding of sleep in the early years and feel a bit more confident about handling and developing your own child's sleep habits. I'm going to be upfront with you about this topic. Sleep is really on everyone's lips. You just need to go into a bookstore, or there's all these blogs on the internet. There's a lot of businesses around sleep. So people are concerned about it, are unsure about it, and really you're not alone. So don't feel like you're alone in wondering and wanting to know more about children's sleep. We know many parents today seem to measure how well they're doing as a parent by how well their child sleeps. And I wonder if any of you out there are experiencing this or have experienced it. You know, is this the first question that people ask you? Are they sleeping through the night? Or how well are they sleeping? You may want to use the chat room to just relate your own experience. So if you're hoping for a quick solution to your child's sleep issues tonight, I'm sorry this won't be the webinar to provide that. There's really, in ways, no quick fixes. But there is a way of actually developing your own knowledge around sleep and understanding more about what children need. I'll be providing you with an overview of many of the factors that influence your children's sleep, including your relationship with your relationship with your child and your child's relationship with you. I'll also talk about a child's sleep needs in the context of their development and how understanding these factors will help you to promote sound sleep habits for your child, and also address challenging sleep and settling behaviour. So tonight's seminar, first of all, we'll start by completing a poll, and we're asking you how old your child is, and this just gives us an idea about really when parents are experiencing difficulties with their kids or wanting to know more information about their children's sleep. So if you could complete that, that would be great. Just take a moment for that while most of you complete that. So in tonight's seminar, we'll talk first about being a parent and what the experience of that, and how none of us are really ever prepared for being a parent. I'm a mother of 4 children and a grandma of 3, and I know that with the birth of each child, I began to wonder, what on earth am I doing here? And I had a lot of training and background in working with children, and still it rocks your confidence, and I don't think we really are prepared for that journey into the unknown of being a parent. We'll also talk about relationships, then we'll move on and talk a bit more about sleep and between birth to 5 years, and we'll also talk about children's development and sleep patterns so that you can sort of get a big picture of how it's all linked. So let's start off with being a parent. Sorry, I'm a bit technophobic at times. I'm having trouble with just even the slides. Okay, so it all starts here. You know, it's the birth, and with you have a baby. Hopefully, it's a very healthy baby, and all of a sudden you've got to start being a parent. Now we know there are many factors that influence the way we parent and way we adjust to being a parent. And one of the major influences is our own experience of being parented. Whether it was a good experience or a negative experience will impact on your approach to the day-to-day work of being a parent. And many new parents are very conscious that they do not want to parent the way they themselves were parented. However, most new parents find themselves doing or behaving or saying things in ways that reminds them very much of their own parents. And it takes a considerable effort and knowledge to parent differently. So just be conscious of that. And today we also have a greater understanding of the impact of early relationships on children's long-term health and well-being. And we now know the importance of warm, nurturing relationships that are needed to foster healthy brain development and promote children to really develop to their full potential. However, if you haven't been parented in a warm, nurturing way, then this is something you have to learn, and it can be challenging at times. It's also challenging just to parent if you're feeling tired and fatigued. So the fatigue that we experience, especially in the first few months of parenthood, is often totally unexpected. Just the sleep deprivation, the work around taking care of a baby. If you're breastfeeding a baby, then that also adds to the tiredness. So there's this impact of fatigue both on the mother but also on the father, and we often forget about dads and the impact of sleep deprivation on them. Like for mothers, the impact is real and can often be a precursor to depression. So both parents are at risk, and we need to be mindful of that. You can also be challenged in the transition to parenting if you and your partner are not on the same page in your approach to parenting. And this is especially relevant when talking about sleep and sleep interventions. There needs to be consistency in your approaches to sleep practices and routines. And if an intervention is to be put in place, then both parents need to be in agreement. And this can be difficult if you and your partner's temperaments are quite different, and it may take lots of negotiation and conversations to acknowledge how each are feeling and what you're thinking about the intervention, and to reach a decision that's right for both each of you and for your child. So these are really important things to remember. If both of you need to be on the same page, if you're really aiming to get children to bed at 7, then both of you need to work to get that baby or child to bed at 7 o'clock at night. Babies and children need consistency. They need a warm, nurturing relationship with their adult caregivers, you, the parent, to learn that the world is a safe place. They learn that there are adults that will protect and love them. We need to remember that human babies, your babies, are the most vulnerable of all mammals. They rely on adults, newborns rely on adults like yourselves to interpret and manage their feelings. They will gradually understand more about the world through their interaction with you. The baby will start to associate a smiling face with pleasure or a hostile face with pain. So, babies start to interpret from a very early age what is on your face. These images help the baby to predict what will happen next and learn how best to respond. So your work as parents is to understand the complexity of your relationship with your baby. It's a reciprocal relationship, so the baby bounces off you and you bounce off their baby. So if you have a baby smile at you and you'll smile back, and then you'll feel very happy and elated that they've got all of a sudden this is happening for you. The first smile is something I think we all remember. It's important to develop a responsive capacity as a parent to support your baby to adapt to its changing needs. And it requires you to be adaptable as well. It's a constant process of change, and it's often a roller coaster ride. And just from looking at the chat room earlier on, I can see that a lot of you are having a bit of a roller coaster ride in regards to sleep, and that it's tough. So what can we do to help things get a bit better in relation to the whole movement towards parenting. I think it's important to try and enjoy some of those early years, and as well as survive them. And we often don't at times talk about enjoying it. You often hear it described as work, but we don't always talk about is it work that we actually enjoy. So I think what you need to be able to do is to give yourselves the best shot of doing a good job as a parent. Is first of all to remember that there's no such thing as a perfect parent. And even though we all think we have them, there's no such thing as a perfect child. So we need to acknowledge this and have the courage to try and be the parent we want to be, and accept that we won't always get it right, but that we might, if we keep trying, we'll be able to meet our baby or child's needs on most occasions. We also need to know our limits and be prepared to ask for help. I think at times we need courage to ask for help. Help-seeking behaviour is a very positive thing for parents to have. And try and use whatever resources you have around you, whether it's family or friends or neighbours, to help you in your role. Give yourself permission to have a messy house. Choose to have a rest instead of cleaning. If someone offers you help, accept it. Be conscious that that's okay. And if you see other parents struggling, maybe you can try and offer to help them. We need to be empathetic with other parents rather than judgmental. And constantly parents say to me that the worst critics of parents are parents themselves, when really they need to be their best allies. So I think it's really important that we remember that. And I think this is a photo that just highlights what it's like, that sleeplessness and of early parenting, the fatigue that mothers feel. Just the work around trying to establish best breastfeeding, if you're trying to do that, or even just if you're bottle feeding, just getting up and having broken sleep. So I want you to just have a look at this photo and just think about what's happening here. When I was talking before about really noticing what's happening between, in your relationship with your baby, then this is a good example of what we call mirroring. And for this to be happening, there needs to be a strong relationship. So the baby, what's happening here is the mother is mirroring the child and the child's mirroring the baby. There's a closeness, and that mother is regulating the little fellow, and you can see on his face that he feels very calm near her, and she is sort of enjoying what's happening there. We often don't stop and enjoy these moments that happen. They don't happen all the time for a lot of parents, but I'd really encourage you to try and think about and reflecting on those moments that happen for you on a daily basis, where you actually get to delight in your child. And when you're tired and exhausted, that can be really difficult. So if you're not able to think of anything positive, if you find yourself in a position that you're feeling sad a lot of the time and are really struggling, make sure you talk to someone and whether it's a friend or a relative, or see your GP if you need to. You're not alone in feeling this way at times. A lot of parents go through periods of feeling really down and sad, but but when it gets to feel like it's all the time, you really need to speak to someone. So here's this little fellow asleep in the supermarket trolley. You can interpret this in a few different ways. This is a 2-year-old who's actually learn to sleep anywhere, really. If you can fall asleep in a supermarket trolley halfway through eating his popcorn. But it's very interesting when you look at photos like this, someone might walk up and think, well, why has she got her child sleeping in the trolley? She should be at home with her child. Yet it's a matter of survival often for parents just to even get the shopping done. And this child's actually doing okay, he's asleep, and you really have got to admire the fact that he can sleep in that position, because I know I couldn't. These sort of thing often leaves parents open for judgment by passers-by and questioning what's going on there. But we should just be kinder and think, well, you know, that mum's doing okay. So if we move on, just reiterating the importance of having the courage to ask for help and having the courage to be the parent you want to be, and be kind to yourself and other parents. It's a hard road at times, and we need to take care of each other. People often talk about it takes a village to raise a child, and there's a lot of truth in that. But we need to just start by taking care of those around us for a start, and be prepared to be flexible and go with the process of change. So I think we'll move on now. I'm going to talk a bit more now about sleep from birth to 5 years, and we'll start off with talking about sleep science. So what does the science tell us about sleep, and look at children's needs around sleep. This is another little fellow who found it easy to sleep on the floor. This is another little fellow who found it easy to sleep on the floor. So some children will adapt to sleeping anywhere, as long as they're warm. Don't know about being that comfortable, but he's warm. So I'm just going to pop a slide in here. I think it's always important to acknowledge that we need to make sure our children are safe wherever they're sleeping. So this is what used to be the SIDS site that's now called Red Nose, and if you need to know more about safe sleeping, then don't hesitate to go to that site. So just when we're looking about how much sleep children need, I was just wondering, how many hours sleep did you have last night? And we're just really interested to see how well you're going as parents in getting enough sleep, and especially if you're being woken constantly. Mm-hmm. Oh. No. Wow. I hope all of you are still awake, because not a lot of you have had much sleep. When do you feel it? Okay, well, I'll let you finish that and we'll get on to talking about the science of sleep. So there's a wide range of normal sleep behaviour in childhood, and you can sort of see that from the sleep that's happening for you as adults, there's a big variation there, and it's always a bit different when you're when you're parents and parents of young children, because your sleep changes constantly. But the reality is, adults probably around your age usually generally need between 8 to 9 hours sleep a night. You can get away with 7, but generally 8 to 9 hours sleep is what's recommended. As you get older, someone like myself probably only needs 7 to 8 hours a night. So it's but when you look at the poll, then people are just not getting anywhere near that sleep, a lot of you. So and in ways, some people survive okay without that sleep, but a lot don't. And I think if you're getting 4 or 5 hours sleep a night and you're driving a car, really think wisely around if you're okay to be driving that car. with that lack of sleep. So we know there's a big wide range of normal sleep behaviour in childhood. So I'll go through that, and I want you to remember that when I put up and talk about hours of sleep, I'm talking about averages. There's a big variation, and the variation is based on individual children's needs. So when there's a few things as well as the hours of sleep that need to happen. So we know that when children are learning to sleep, they need to achieve 3 things. They need to learn to sleep at night and be awake during the day. They need to learn to go to sleep without help. And they need to learn to get back to sleep after waking up at night. And just looking at a few of the comments in the chat room earlier, it looks like that children waking at night and not going back to sleep is a problem for many of you. So if we get a chance at the end, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Now, these 3 things that children need to achieve sound really quite simple, but it's not always that way. There's a whole lot of growth and development, both the child and you as parents, that needs to happen for these habits to be in place. The first step is the achievement of a sleep rhythm, and this definitely doesn't happen till around 3 months. The baby's brain needs to develop some regulatory capacity to inhibit the arousal reflexes and fall into a deep sleep. So in a lot of, if you wonder why you wrap babies, it's to really curb that flight mechanisms of the arousal system that is again about the immaturity of our mammal babies. So that is one of the things that needs to sort of diminish before babies will get into a good sleep rhythm. The other thing that needs to happen is the baby's stomach needs to grow. Babies have a very small stomach to start off with, and that needs to grow. And as it grows and they can feed more, they feel full and they're less likely to wake. And the other thing that needs to happen if you're breastfeeding a baby, the physiology of breastfeeding demands that babies wake for nighttime feeds. The hormones needed for breast milk production are produced at night. So the reality is you need to wake, well, the baby will wake you, so that, and it's part of the evolutionary process that needs to happen. Okay. So how much sleep does your baby or child need in a 24-hour period? And I'm talking about a 24-hour period here. And I think when you're thinking about children's sleep, you need to look at it over 24 hours. And if you're trying to work out how well your baby's doing or child is doing with their sleep, you need to plot it over about a week to get an idea about what the pattern is that's happening here. So newborn babies sleep for 16 to 20 hours in over a 24-hour period to start with. Then little babies and between the ages of 2 to 12 months generally sleep between 9 to 12 hours a night. And then as well, they'll have another 2 to 4 hours, 4.5 hours of daytime naps. Sorry, I just lost my screen there, but it's all right now. The naps can last anywhere between 30 minutes to 2 hours. So, and they might have about 4 naps over that between the ages of 2 to 12 months. Generally by about 3 months, babies are starting to get into the cycle of having an active sleep pattern and quiet sleep pattern. So then by about 8 months, most babies are waking after 6 to 7 hours of sleep at night. And they generally, about 70% of them can get themselves back to sleep. And that is where babies have learnt to do some self-soothing or self-settling by 8 months. With toddlers from 12 months to 3 years, they generally sleep between 12 to 13 hours a night, or in a 24-hour period, I should say, not a night, 12 to 13 hours in a 24-hour period. And and they still have a nap, and it generally decreases from 2 naps to 1 nap at about 18 months. Preschoolers to preps generally sleep between 11 to 12 hours in a 24-hour period, and their naps generally decreased from 1 to none. Although you get some children who are starting school who really still need to sleep. Again, remember, it's very individual, and you as parents will know your children better than anyone else, and you'll be able to pick up what your child needs. And I think it's important to remember that you're actually the experts in your child, no one else. You are. You can go to experts for expert knowledge, but as far as knowing your child, you're the one. So let's talk a bit about the connection between children's sleep and overall development. When I talk about development, I'm talking about their children's physical development, their social and emotional development, and their cognitive development, or how their thinking and learning is going. And this is all driven by brain development. And it's where you need, as parents, we need to be able to sort of connect the dots. We need to be, as parents, we need to be able to be prepared to constantly adapt. So it's actually, if you actually understand what's happening in your child's development, you can almost know what might happen next. So, and that often makes it a bit easier in your parenting. I want you to remember that children's development doesn't happen in isolation of the environment that they're living in or their relationships. It's all connected. And your job is to listen to your child and try and work out what's going on. There's plenty of resources out there that can help you join the dots. Raising Children Network has great resources around children's development. There's videos and there's lots of information out there to help you understand what's happening. There's other tools like Wonder Weeks, which has an app, and it will often prepare you for those periods of what we call natural regression, or touch points that they're called, can be called as well, where there's big bursts in children's brain development, which results in the baby becoming almost a little bit unhinged, and they become more, often more irritable, wake more, and need a lot more nurturing. And if you follow Wonder Weeks, or if you know about touch points, that usually starts around 6 weeks and happens again at 4 months, and you can follow the weeks within the Wonder Weeks picture all the way through the second year of life. So it's important to be able to access information that has a strong evidence base to it, and to be wary of some of the blogs and books out there that really have no evidence underpinning their content. And it's also important to remember that what works for one parent may and their child may not work for you. So you need to be discerning in the information you access and use. So what happens in that first year? Well, I've talked a bit about that with the changes that happen around the periods of natural regression, but the first year is all around rapid growth and brain development, and you see that in the size of the baby's heads. You know how much your baby's head grows, and it's all about meeting your baby's needs nutritionally, and how much they often need a lot of feeding at different times through that period. But it's important to understand that all this development is about establishing the development of language and establishing mobility so that they can explore their world. So you'll see your baby develop the skill to hold their head up, and then they'll learn to roll over, to crawl, and to try and to walk. This is a busy time, and it requires you to really understand what your baby's trying to tell you, what their mannerisms or cues are, and to respond accordingly. In the second year of growth and development, your baby has often developed into a little person who their language is much stronger. They've got increased mobility and independence, and that has implications for sleep in many ways. They learn to call out, they learn to climb, and will get out of bed and they'll come and visit you. In the third year that your child's becoming an individual, they're very unique. Their language is established and they're physically competent. They're very mobile. They're often quite clever at delaying going to bed. And if they do wake up in the middle of the night, they're not often that easy to get back to sleep. And that requires some interventions usually. We can talk about that a bit later on. In years 4 and 5, we see the child preparing for school, and they're developing empathy and self-reflection. They're learning lots and they know a lot more about social expectations. That doesn't always mean that they will be cooperative at bedtime. And again, it's really important to have in place some routines. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. One of the things I wanted to mention around babies crying and especially crying at bed, when they're in that first 12 months, is that it's really important to be able to discern the difference between your baby's crying and grizzling. And a lot of times we hear parents going in all the time because their babies, they say they're crying, but they're actually grizzling. And if babies are grizzling, they're often trying to get back to sleep. So if your baby starts grizzling after you put them down to sleep and they've been down for about 40 minutes and they start what you think is crying, if it's not full-on crying and just grizzling, then leave them. They will most likely be able to get them back to sleep. After a baby's sleep cycle is about 40 minutes, so that's when they tend to wake up, but they will most often go back to sleep if they've learned to do that. As adults, we will wake often during the night that we don't remember because we just go back to sleep. So what are some simple actions you can take around sleep with your children? I think one of the most important things is to really understand what is actually happening for your child, to make sure you're interpreting what is happening correctly. And if you're not sure, then make sure you access help either from your maternal and child health nurse or your GP. Always look at the big picture and when you're trying to work out what's going on. What's happening in the family that could be impacting on your child. Think about, are they comfortable? Are they hungry? Are they wet? Do they have pain? Do they just need a cuddle and reassurance? Or is the fact that they're that the sleep is interrupted or there's difficulties, is it to do with sleep associations? Are they going to sleep in your arms and then waking up in their cot or bassinet? Because if they've gone to sleep in your arms and then waking in your cot or bassinet, they'll think, well, this is not what I experienced before. This is not what I want. I was quite comfortable in those arms, and now I'm awake in this cot. So the reality is it's really important to try and get your babies down to sleep awake. And if they're not quite awake, or at least semi-awake, so if they're drifting off, especially if they've had a big breastfeed, they often sort of look a bit breast milk drunk, as they describe it. But it's important to try and make sure your babies don't go to sleep on the breast, but that you can get them off the breast and sort of down semi-awake. Then if they do wake up, they're more likely to go back to sleep without wanting you to actually help them get back to sleep. If they've got a dummy and it's falling out all the time, then that's the reality of having a dummy, I suppose. Until the child learns to put it back in themselves, you're going to need to get up and put it back. So from very early on, think about putting in place a good sleep routine, and that you and your partner can adhere to, or if you're by yourself, that you can adhere to as much as possible. So something like bath, story, quiet time in bed of an evening, around the same time each evening, so that the child gets used to and expects, oh, that's right, this is about bedtime. Remember also that babies and children who sleep well during the day generally sleep better at night. So try to pick up when your baby, their sleep signs. Try and pick up the sleep signs early and respond accordingly. If you can sort of get your child to sleep when they're showing their first signs of tiredness, they will generally settle better. Be very clear to limit screen time. And when I talk about screen time here, I'm talking about every type of screen that seems to be in babies and children's lives these days. It just stimulates the brain so much, and it's not easy to settle. They're really bad things to have in your room as well if you're using them at night. You know, it's a really good sleep habit to not take screens into your bedrooms. Even though it's tempting, maybe to catch up on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, try and leave them out of your bedrooms. And there's a few things you need to, really need to consider if you're looking at doing interventions around sleep. And there's lots of interventions out there that some have an evidence base to them, but others don't. You need to consider that if you're looking at interventions, how do they sit with your values and your partner's values around parenting? Can you hear? Is it okay now? Yep. Okay, so we're just checking the mic. How do you think your child may respond to the intervention? So you're looking at intervention. I want you to also, if you're looking at a sleep intervention at all, whether it's controlled comforting or another type of intervention like that, how will the child respond to this? You know, think of what the child's voice is like. And also at the same time, think about whether you have the energy to be consistent to do it. Because if you're going to put an intervention in place, you need to have the energy to follow it through. They're not easy at times. And often real change can take 2 to 3 weeks of constant work. So you need to really plan interventions so that they do work. And again, one last message for you is to remember that you are the expert in your child and to trust yourself in your work as parents. So we're going to look at questions.
Okay, so what we might do now, folks, is, since Di has finished that content for you, we've had a bunch of really good questions come up throughout the webinar. We're going to try and get to some of these, but I really don't think we'll be able to get to all of them. I'm sorry about that, but there really isn't time in this kind of forum, and it would be a bit, we could be here all night, let's be honest. And also just bear in mind that it can be quite hard, I think, for Di to answer some really specific questions. So she might give you some general comments, but just bear in mind if you've got something really specific, you might have to seek out your own individualized advice. So what we'll do is I might ask you some questions, Di, that have come up during the chat, and you see what you make of them. How does that sound? All right, so first of all, Tara had a question that came up about finding out the best way to set up a bedtime routine when her 3-month-old is still cluster feeding from about 9 or 10 to midnight. What do you think about that one?
I think you can still start off with trying to start the routine early, but the reality is if you've got a 3-month-old that's still cluster feeding, and I presume it's breastfed, then it's almost like you've got to go with it for just a little bit longer. That will get better. The baby, your baby will start to settle, and hopefully not need those cluster feeds. You could also talk to your maternal and child health nurse or lactation consultant around the breastfeeding and just see if they've got some ideas on maybe trying to reduce some of that cluster feeding. But some babies will need that type of feeding until they're about 4 months old.
The next question, Di, is one that sounds like people want to know a bit more about how kids learn or babies learn to go back to sleep. That mechanism you were talking about of learning to self-settle. Can you expand on that at all? I imagine it's quite complicated.
Well, it is again about brain development and about the development of self-regulation, but they need to. Babies will, as long as they feel warm, safe, and secure, they might need some encouragement at first. Was there an age group for this we were talking about, or was it just a general? No. Was there an age group for this we were talking about, or was it just a general? No, this was just in general. Yeah, so it takes practice, and so you will find as your child grows, they generally get better at self-soothing, and one of the ways that they do self-soothe is by learning to find their hands. And one of the things around wrapping is that it's been very hard for children to find their hands, and some of the research that's been done in the UK in the last few years has found that they were doing some research looking at another part of sleep behaviour, and we're stunned to find out that those babies that could find their hands before 3 months, so when we've got them wrapped, but the ones that actually could get their hands to their mouths before 3 months learnt to self-settle much quicker and were able to soothe themselves, so they could then settle. So I'd really, if you are wrapping your babies, and it's a bit contentious wrapping at the moment, so I think that we're learning new things about the way children are wrapped, but I'd really encourage you to try and at least loosen one of their hands so that your baby can get their hand to their mouth if possible.
Thank you, Di. Here's a tricky one that I've actually had a few times as well. What do you do when you've got twins? If you've got young twins and they tend to wake each other up. Is there any suggestions or anything that can help there? I imagine it's a tricky situation.
Yeah, that's the joy of twins at times. I mean, when they get older, they'll sort of keep each other entertained, but when they're young, they will often do this, wake each other up. If you're needing dummies to soothe them, then the reality is that you're stuck with putting the dummies in. Yeah, so dummies can be a real issue at times, especially with babies, because if they fall out, then they wake, and then they need them put back in. So it's either, I mean, something you could think about is that whether you keep persisting with the dummies, or that this is what will probably happen, unless you put the children in different rooms, which you won't probably do very often. They usually love being near each other. It's a difficult situation to be in. I'm just wondering whether you, if you spoke to some other mothers of twins, if they had some better ideas, that they might be able to help you with their own experience. It's a hard one. So I don't want to say to you, it's just the reality of dummies, because it sounds like I'm minimising the issue for you. It's a hard place to be.
We've got some more specific questions, and see what you can say about them, Di, around setting up sleep routines. For example, in the case of a 3.5 month old, you want to get a sleep routine going, any tips around how you would go about that and what to aim for and that sort of thing?
Okay, if with a 3.5-month-old, then they're probably still having a late night feed. But I'd be, if it's possible, if your partner's home or both of you are home, I think it's a really lovely opportunity for baby to feed your baby around. Well, you feed them when they need to be fed, but if you can look at bathing them, setting up a bath time routine around, say, 6:37, and then you can do maybe a baby massage or something relaxing like that. Read your baby a story. I mean, 3-month-olds will love you telling them a story or reading them a story. And then again, preparing them for bed, whether they're in a sleep suit or in a bed with blankets, however you're settling them into their bassinet. But again, it's the same routine. You start that same routine with a 3.5-month-old that you will use with a 15-month-old or a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old. Start it and it just becomes the practice in the family, and it works. One of the research is telling us that babies respond best to routines. I mean, there's still flexibility to have an overnight sleep at Gran's or for the parents to go away for a holiday and all that sort of thing. But the routine, if you put the routine in place, then that's a predictable and safe feeling for the child.
Okay, we might have time for just one or two more, I think, folks. We had a few along the lines, Di, of what to do with a young child who's resistant to the bedtime routine. So if they tend to get hyperactive at night and that's when they want to start running around and being crazy, or if you're trying to set up a good routine, making suggestions about what we should do next to get ready for sleep, and they're just not having a bar of it.
They sound like a rather energetic, determined little person. Again, that's temperament coming into play. I'm just wondering how old this child is.
I think it was about
3 months or 3 years. Okay, if this is it sounds like it may be a toddler or a 3 or 4. Yep. Again, it's about it's about parenting really. It's about being consistent and getting them to try and concentrate. And what I think is a good idea to do is say at dinner time when they're having their dinner, their evening meal, start talking to them then about bedtime. So start early with your preparation, saying, well, look, after we finish dinner, let's have a bath. Sometimes Dad arrives home from work and there might be some rough and tumble play, especially if it's a little boy, and that's fine. But again, you'll then need to de-escalate and quiet the house so that your child is ready for bed. I'd always make sure there's no television on, no television or screen, because that will just, if they're hyper after dinner, then that will make them worse. You might want to play some music, some quiet music, that might help. But generally it's around preparing them for what needs to happen, and sometimes speaking fairly firmly and putting really clear boundaries in place that there's a reason for it, and explain to them why you need them to have a good sleep. They understand a lot more than we give them credit to at times. So, and even with small babies, I think you should always be giving them good sleep messages. So, it's time for sleep. Even the 3-month-old, again, talk to your babies, talk to your children, and explain to them why they need to have what the routine that's there.
Okay, thank you, Di. And one maybe following on from that, or you might have covered this already. What about in older kids? If they've been sleeping well, you've gotten past the point of them being able to sleep through and self-settle, and then they start developing habits like getting up in the night and wanting to come into your bed, and it feels like you're going backwards. Any comments on that one?
Well, this is actually not an uncommon occurrence, and there could be different reasons for this, and it's worth considering what's been happening in the little person's life that where they might be a little bit uneasy about things, and it could be they've maybe started new childcare, or they've gone into kindergarten, or they're starting school, and they may just want sort of a bit more nurturing. Always make sure they're not cold. So the physical sides of of sleep. So if it's in winter they're not cold, or if it's summer they're not too hot. Kids love getting into their parents' beds, and in a lot of cultures that's where children slept. When we look at the history of childhood, it's really a new thing for children to be sleeping in cots and in other rooms, because people didn't have houses that had bedrooms. Everyone just slept in the same place. So children are, it's sort of it's a very safe thing for a child to want, is to be in your bed. If it's really disturbing you, I think you have to take them back to bed, and it might mean you need to sit with them for a little while and reassure them until they're nearly asleep, and then go back to bed yourself. And you may need to do that for a few weeks to start with if this is becoming a habit. But again, it's about persisting. There's some information on the Raising Children Network on camping out, which is about sort of sitting with your child and gradually getting out of the room again. And that you sometimes need to do that with children who wake during the night. But if they're really disturbing you, then definitely take them back to their own bed and sit with them and try and reassure them that they're okay. But think about what's happening that may have caused this.
All right, thanks, Di. Now, folks, we won't have time for any more questions tonight. Thank you so much for your very active participation. It's made it very clear to us that this is a really hot topic for parents, and one where parents are craving more information. So we hope to bring you more content on this topic in the future. But as always, if you do feel like you're really struggling, we encourage you to get your own local support from some of those sources that Di mentioned. Now, of course, the recording will be available, and we encourage you to do that will be shared by email, and we encourage you to do that survey. If you do have time, that would really help us to improve the webinars in the future, and the link for that was shared in the chat. So we're about to log off, and I'll just pass over to Di to say good night.
Good night, everyone, and try and find some time to enjoy those beautiful children of yours.